Hello sim racers and welcome back to Fixed Setup Weekly. In this episode we're going to be looking at week 2 of season 3 in iRacing for ARCA, C Fixed, B Fixed, and A Fixed. So how did Nashville treat you last week? What'd you think of that new racetrack? I would say that feedback I've seen has been mixed, but mostly positive. I think most of the negative feedback is just how some people raced on the racetrack, not about the racetrack itself. Let me know down in the comments section below how week 1 went for you. I did a handful of races throughout the week, most of them on Saturday night, and I thought Nashville was pretty good overall. C Fixed was kind of a minefield, but that's to be expected when everybody's just on top of each other lap after lap. A Fixed got a lot more spread out because of that low downforce package, and I thought it was pretty fun. I wish we had that package at other speedways. ARCA at Chicagoland was really good, and even though I only ran it one time, I saw a lot of positive comments about it while I was streaming throughout the week, and I think the setup being enjoyable to drive was a big factor, but also the freedom to run either the top or the bottom. That was a breath of fresh air to say the least. Some people said the top was actually overpowered. I don't know for sure, I didn't really try it myself, but hey, it's better than just being stuck on the bottom lap after lap. This week, ARCA heads to Iowa Speedway and NASCAR takes on Pocono Raceway, a track that most people either just love or hate. Very rarely does somebody have a neutral opinion about Pocono, but hey, if you're into it, this is going to be your type of week. So let's take a look at what's on tap for week number 2. But first, a huge shout out to this video's sponsor, Advanced GG. If you're on that iRating grind or trying to jump up to that next license level, Focus from Advanced GG can help you get there, since it's the only clinically proven esports supplement to boost mental performance in high-pressure gaming environments. To get your hands on some Focus, use the link down in the description below to head over to advanced.gg and make sure you use code HOUSE at checkout to save 10% on your purchase. ARCA heads to Iowa Speedway, a 7/8 mile track with progressive banking that's located in Newton, Iowa. Just because NASCAR and ARCA both took Iowa off their schedules in 2021, it doesn't mean we can't race there in iRacing, and I say that's a good thing. This is a fun place to race. Iowa has the characteristics of a short track, but races like a speedway, and in these ARCA cars, you're going to be kept on your toes constantly. This race is 45 laps in length and takes place at 3:20 p.m. in sim. You'll have one fast repair, but as is the case for the entirety of Season 3, there are no sets of tires in the pits. Even if you wreck, you may get a new car, but you're not getting new tires. For my hot lap, I used a 14:1 steering ratio, -10 wheel offset, and 62% brake bias. My lap time was a 24.232. In race trim, I kept the steering ratio and offset the same, but I dropped the brake bias to 61% to start. After 20 laps, my right front tire was worn 4% more than my right rear, and I felt that mostly on the entry to turn 3. You'll feel like you can't get into the corners as well when that right front tire wears out, so back up your corner entry, it always helps. Even though the car will break loose on corner exit from time to time, the right front tire wear will be a bigger issue throughout the run if you're not careful. A 16:1 steering ratio just felt way too slow for me to catch and correct minor slides, and this car, as it usually does, lacks rear grip, so you're gonna be active on that steering wheel. If you're someone who is disciplined with the throttle pedal, you may be able to get away with a bigger steering ratio to help that right front tire, but I don't think it's worth the trade-off. I found that moving up a groove and not running the bottom helped me run more consistent laps and avoid that loss of rear grip on exit. If you're experiencing that same issue, try running a lane to a lane and a half up off the bottom, especially in turns 3 and 4, and see how that helps. You may have to wait a bit before getting back to the throttle when you run that line, but you should notice that the car feels more secure all the way off the corner when you do it. My lap times fell off by about a second towards the end of this run, but I found it pretty easy to run consistent lap times as front grip went away. Again, backing up the corners and adjusting my line helped a lot in finding this consistency, but don't forget you can also drop your brake bias as the run goes on as well. All of this should help you keep the sharp drop-offs and lap times to a minimum. Playing host to NASCAR in Week 2 is Pocono Raceway, an incredibly unique racetrack located in Long Pond, Pennsylvania. Two things should stand out immediately when you see this racetrack. It's a triangle, and it's enormous. This track is 2.5 miles in length and features 3 different length straightaways that connect 3 differently configured turns. Each turn at Pocono Raceway is modeled after an existing turn at other racetracks. Turn 1 is modeled after Trenton Speedway. Turn 2 is modeled after Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And Turn 3 is modeled after the Milwaukee Mile. Fans making the trip to Pocono Raceway will be witnessing history as the Cup Series will run its first ever doubleheader weekend with a race on Saturday and on Sunday. Coupled with ARCA, the Truck Series, and the Xfinity Series, these race fans will have a lot of racing to watch at the Tricky Triangle. C Fixed is a 25-lap race that takes place at 3:10 p.m. in Sim. You'll have 2 sets of tires in the pits. For my hot lap, I used a 14-to-1 steering ratio and 62% brake bias. My lap time was a 55.051. For my race run, I upped the steering ratio to 16-to-1, but left the brake bias at 62%. After 12 laps, my right rear tire had worn 1% more than my right front, but the truck felt pretty neutral overall. I noticed that the truck would get loose on corner exit if I was getting aggressive with the throttle, especially if I took a more shallow entry and tried to wrap the bottom lane all the way through. Being as slow as they are, the trucks rely on momentum so much, and anything you can do to not bind the truck up in the corner is a benefit. I believe that taking a later entry to hit the apex and then track out to the wall on exit is the best way to keep momentum up while not hurting the tires. With my tire wear, I would consider dropping the steering ratio back down to 14-to-1 and seeing how it impacted my performance. Since the truck doesn't seem to naturally get loose, but rather lose rear grip when it's pushed too hard or driven the wrong way, I'm less inclined to think that 14-1 is going to be worlds better than 16-1. My pace dropped off by about 0.8 of a second by the end of the run, but you can see that my ability to be consistent wasn't all that strong. Part of this is due to the nature of the track, how big it is, and how one little mistake can ruin the entire lap. But the other part is due to Pocono just not being a track that I particularly enjoy. With some better consistency and fewer mistakes, this grouping of lap times would absolutely be cleaner. But in a race where the draft is going to play a bigger role than anything else, it's tough to say what kind of falloff is reasonable to expect. Be Fixed is a 30-lap race that takes place at 3:10 p.m. in Sim. You'll have 2 sets of tires in the pits. For my hot lap, I used a 14-1 steering ratio and 61% brake bias. My lap time was a 55.134. After a 15-lap run where I inadvertently used a 12-1 steering ratio, I can safely recommend using a 14-1 steering ratio in the race along with a 59% brake bias to start. My right front tire was 6% more worn, and halfway through the run, I could really feel that lack of front grip everywhere. The car just refused to turn in any of the corners, and when it did, it's only because I backed the entry way up and just had a really slow lap time as a result. Unfortunately, this is just quintessential Be Fixed right now, and unless you drive the car in a very specific manner, you're going to run into this issue. My lap times fell off over 2 seconds by the end of this run. Absolutely horrendous. I can tell you with full confidence that I'd be faster for longer with a 14-1 ratio, so take what you see here with a grain of salt, but also take it as a cautionary tale for what can happen if you do not drive this car the right way. My failure on this run came in the form of overdriving corner entry on a setup that is, by design, very tight on corner entry. A 16-1 ratio would not be recommended in this case because of how loose the car can get on corner exits. That high of a ratio will just be too slow to make the minor corrections needed to catch the car when it loses rear grip. Lowering the brake bias as the run goes on will help as well, but as I'll probably say for every Be Fixed this season, backing up your corner entry will pay the biggest dividends for saving that right front tire and finding more consistency in your race pace. A Fixed is a 30-lap race that takes place at 3:10 p.m. in Sim. You'll have 2 sets of tires in the pits. For my hot lap, I used a 14-1 steering ratio and 61% brake bias. My lap time was a 54.551. For the race, I recommend a 16:1 steering ratio and 59% brake bias to start. I ended up doing 2 long runs, one at 14:1 and the other at 16:1. In the end, it's really hard not to recommend 16:1. My right front was 10% less worn using 16:1. Good enough for me to keep using it. My tire wear when using the 16:1 steering ratio netted a right front tire that was worn 6% more than the right rear. That's compared to a 16% difference with a 14:1 steering ratio. So what is that improvement worth? Look at these 2 runs and the difference in lap times on a comparative basis. A less worn right front tire allowed me to be considerably faster and more consistent. No surprise there. And that's why I'm sold on 16:1 for this week's A-Fixed race. With the high downforce package equipped for Pocono, it's pretty hard to get loose in these cars, so when it's on the right front that much, the less you can turn the wheel, the better. Like C-Fixed, if you flatten out the turns as much as you can, you'll keep momentum up and tire wear down. The draft will be a big part of each lap when you're in the pack, and I'd expect some very aggressive blocking, especially down that long pond straightaway that leads to turn 2. Pocono is one of the best tracks to emphasize the importance of track position. You'll be hard-pressed to find a lot of success if you're not starting up front, even with cautions. Low horsepower coupled with long straightaways means the drivers who find success will be the ones who figure out how to get out of the corners better and carry more speed down those straightaways. And that'll do it for this episode of Fixed Setup Weekly. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this information to be informative and helpful, please help me out and hit that like button down below the video. If you're new around here, I hope you consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. I'd love to see you join our community and never miss another video. Consider yourself invited to come watch my iRacing adventures over on my Twitch channel. Join my Discord server and follow me on Twitter to connect with me. All of that is linked down in the description below. Thanks for watching and have a great week of racing.